Hi, everyone. How are you? Thanks so much for having me here. Just share my screen real quick. And I am going to tell you WTF is QF. So this is a presentation that I put together about quadratic funding. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Owocki. I am the founder and CEO of Gitcoin, where you can get coins in exchange for your contributions for open source software. I am also a local community organizer in the Boulder scene, and I am proudly funded by Consensus, the largest blockchain venture studio on the planet. Thank you so much to Joe for believing in Gitcoin. So my talk today is about quadratic funding, which is a new funding mechanism that can do more democratic funding of blockchain ecosystems. And basically, quadratic funding started with the meeting of three minds actually, Zoe and Glenn from Radical Exchange and Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum were both thinking about the problem of funding public goods. Vitalik read Glenn's book, Radical Markets, and they started collaborating on this thing called quadratic funding. What is quadratic funding? It's a math formula. So the idea here is that when you're funding an ecosystem, the optimal way to fund public goods in a blockchain ecosystem, things like open source software or media, things that are good for the ecosystem, is according to this math formula, which says the matching amount that a project receives should be proportional to the sum of the square root of the contributions votes. Simple, right? Quadratic funding is the mathematically optimal way to democratically fund public goods. It's a formula for distributing a matching pool to a set of different projects in your ecosystem. And what's really cool about this math is that the formula for getting a $200 matching donation allows it to go with only a $1 funding. So basically, if I funded a good on Gitcoin grants and with quadratic funding with $1, this matching pool could allocate up to $200. And so the reason why this math works the way it does is that the number of contributors to the matching pool matters more than the amount funded by each person who is funding the project. This pushes power to the edges away from whales and other central power brokers and creates more democracy in public goods funding decisions. So I'm on this website, WTFisQF.com, that we've designed, and I'm going to put together just a play matching round of $5,000. I'm going to fund one grant in that matching pool with 10 contributions worth $1, and I'm going to fund the second grant with one contribution worth $10. And you can see that quadratic funding optimizes for the grant that has the more contributors, regardless of the fact that the funding amount that they both got was exactly the same. So basically, that's the power of quadratic funding, is that if you're a broadly democratically popular grant, then you can get really, really great incentives for people who are contributing to your project. So basically, we're co-funding projects in crypto ecosystems along with the community in those ecosystems. And we're using the community's donations to measure where our donations go to. So quadratic funding is all about incentives. So basically, you can sort of imagine that we're all economic actors in this mesh network, this gradient of incentives, and we're all trying to maximize whatever heuristic it is that we are trying to maximize as economic agents in these systems. But there are multiple incentive gradients that we're climbing or descending at any particular time that are pushing us in a particular direction. And one of the things that quadratic funding does that's really powerful is that it takes economic agents that are on incentive gradients, incentive planes that are different from each other, and it makes those incentive gradients match. And what it's doing is funding not only private projects, but public goods in the process. And I'm going to explain some of the economics of that here. So basically what we're doing is we're taking an incentive gradient of the economic actors in these crypto ecosystems, and we're mutating it so that multiple incentive gradients can align with each other. So basically by funding a private good, like a project in the ecosystem that is creating public goods for that ecosystem, say infrastructure, our entire digital infrastructure is open source software these days. And in aligning those, we're able to create better incentives for people in these ecosystems to fund public goods. So it's like a kind of a mathy way of showing how we're going to alter the incentive gradients in crypto ecosystems to go from people only optimizing for what's good for them in the present moment to thinking about it a little bit more like a bento box. So basically there's this idea called bentoism, bento box, bentoism, where you can create economic incentives for people to care not only about now me, but also now us or future me. So you stretch out what's good for an individual, a private good, into this idea of a public good, and what's good for the ecosystem at large. And I think that one of the really sort of like problems of public goods is that we all have an incentive to not support them, although we all consume them. There's this thing called the free rider problem, where basically people will not contribute to public goods because they don't have to. And so what you see is people consuming public goods, but not ever really giving back. And so what we do is we augment these incentives where instead of just downloading a repo and using it in my stack, I can now contribute back to that repository and actually have a meaningful effect as an everyday user of that software. So quadratic funding is about public goods. So public goods are just basically goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, as opposed to the goods that we're taught about in school in classes about markets, things like food, clothes, cars, your Netflix subscription. Those are all private goods, things that are excludable or rivalrous. Public goods are things like clean air, which I'm consuming right now. And the fact that I'm consuming it doesn't stop anyone else out there from consuming it. Things like national defense, which gives us a sense of security and the ability to buy a house, grow up in the suburbs, and have a family. National defense creates that level of certainty that you can do those things. So we're basically trying to figure out how to fund public goods in the information age. So part of the idea here is that open source software, Gitcoin's mission is to grow and sustain open source software, but there are other public goods that as we transition from the industrial age to the information age, we're going to have to learn how to support. So things like clean air and clean water are public goods that I would like for my children to be able to consume one day. Things like infrastructure, so roads and bridges that are well maintained, don't have a ton of potholes, don't have a ton of tolls on them, is an example of our physical infrastructure, but our digital infrastructure is actually this thing called open source software. Creates $500 billion per year in economic value and doesn't ever, and there's no business model for open source software. Our entire digital infrastructure is maintained nights and weekends by people who support open source software out of the goodwill of their hearts. So how do we fund our digital infrastructure with maybe, say, a blockchain-based network? Another public good that I think that we can all appreciate since the Edward Snowden revelations is this idea of privacy, the idea that someone's not watching you at all times is kind of like a public good. Depends on if you've seen 1984 or read 1984 before, but I think this idea that no one can follow you and have complete information about what you're up to is a powerful thing, and we should probably carry that into the 21st century. It should be a way to fund privacy-related projects. All right, so that's some examples of public goods, which are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. And again, we're using incentive alignments of quadratic funding and this amazing math formula to support public goods in the information age. With me so far? So one of the reasons why I think this really matters right now is that quadratic funding is prescient to me because when I really, really super zoom out and I think about the evolving nature of humanity, we sort of grew up on the savannah in this hunter-gatherer age in which we would be small bands of humans and survive together in basically very small colonies of 200 people or less. And then we settled down into the agricultural age, and the methods through which human organization happened changed, including how big is the group and what is the public good that the group consumes. So in the agricultural age, you maybe consumed the public goods of a lord who defended your lands against the brutish outsiders, the invaders. And so you had the transition to the industrial age, in which we all sort of moved to cities and meta factories, and the economic world became the substrate through which we support ourselves via a job and pay taxes to a government which allocates public goods. This presentation is about What if governments were not the only thing we relied on for public goods funding? And I think that one of the things that's powerful about that is this idea that we could support public goods using markets. So instead of coercive taxation, we can now fund public goods through markets and let people have a little bit more of a say in which public goods are important to them. And we can support digitally native public goods, like the increasingly important to us digital infrastructure of open source software. We can do this all via the Ethereum coordination machine. And I don't care if you're a Bitcoiner, an Ethereum, a DPoS person, a Cardano person. I think that we can all agree that blockchain-based networks are a transparent way of doing business with each other, of creating economic machines that can't be tampered with and will not change the rules on you. All of these blockchains do that. Just so happens I'm building on Gitcoin, which is primarily built on Ethereum. We're going cross-chain eventually, and we're working on that. But blockchain-based networks are a really amazing way of creating institutions, information age institutions, that can fund public goods without having to use coercive taxation that was reigning during the industrial age. So we've got a new digital infrastructure that allows us to manage trust with each other and create economic systems that support public goods. One analogy I like to use when I'm thinking about the blockchain space is this idea of a crypto city. So basically, a city is somewhere where you move to for common infrastructure and create economic relationships with other people in your community. And there's this idea that all of these blockchain-based networks that we're here to talk about today are crypto cities, where we're moving to a place with common infrastructure. In the physical world, it was water and resources. In the digital world, it's open source software, blockchain networks, decentralized storage networks. We've got common infrastructure, and we're all coming together and forming economic relationships with each other in these new crypto cities. So this presentation is about not just was the market street look like in these crypto cities, but it's about what does the infrastructure that allows people to move to the city and be successful. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. If you can make it in Ethereum, then you can make it anywhere. So what kind of infrastructure do we create for helping people with their actual problems they have day to day, like making food or rent payments in these economic, and so arguably it shouldn't all just be private goods that people are consuming as they move to these networks. And that's what quadratic funding is about. So quadratic funding is happening now. Couldn't tell by my presentation, we're on our 7th round of quadratic funding at Gitcoin Grants, and it's all supportive of this mission that we started the company with in 2017, which is to grow open source software. Open source software creates $500 billion worth of value per year in the world, and there's no business model for it. We want to support our digital infrastructure. We need to grow open source software, and that's why I'm here. That's what quadratic funding is for. At Gitcoin, we're building sort of like a Disneyland for developers. So basically the idea is to create a public good for the Ethereum ecosystem where software developers can learn, earn, and meet each other. So like the analog in the physical world might be like a job or a library or a bar where you go to meet people. So we're creating sort of like Disneyland for developers, a kind of little area that has places where you can earn, learn, and meet. And that's how we support open source software. We have a community of 50,000 active developers who are funding these projects in the Ethereum ecosystem, funding each other, creating a mesh network of jobs at gitcoin.co/grants. So if you check out gitcoin.co/grants, that is where we're running a active quadratic funding campaign worth $500,000 OMG. Of funding for open source projects in the Ethereum space. So we've got people funding other public goods funding mechanisms. We've got people funding the Ethereum state media. It's one of my favorite ones. We've got people who are funding privacy, education, community, funding their friends, funding voting infrastructure. These are all information age public goods, and they're being funded using quadratic funding, which is the mathematically optimal way to fund public goods. see where this is going. Quadratic funding is good, and it's going to create better economic relationships among communities in the 21st century. All right, so that's gitcoin.co/grants. A few of the projects that are on Gitcoin grants actually have matching on them. So if you gave $1 to the Radical Exchange Foundation, then you could get a $64 match from the matching pool with the current math on the Radical Exchange grant, which I think is super powerful because it enables people who are contributing to public goods to have crypto coins and to pay their mortgage with them and to fund their lifestyle. So it's all about getting coins in exchange for working on public goods. Have I mentioned my company's name is Gitcoin? It's a place where you can get coins for open source software. We are on our 6th round of quadratic funding right now. We started in 2019 with a round that raised 38K, and then created this sort of like mapping of the preferences of the Ethereum community. What did people want to fund? In this mesh network of jobs right here, each edge is an economic actor in the system, and each node is an economic actor in the system, and each edge is a transaction between those two nodes. So what does the mesh network of jobs look like in the Ethereum space? I'm going to show you right now. Round 2, we raised about 60K. Round 3, 270K. And you can see that the map of preferences is getting bigger each time. That's because we're capturing the preferences of people and putting it into a bigger graph. Round 4, you're starting to see some real structure with the 350K that was raised. Round 5, around 500K raised in the middle of 2020. So we're doing these about once a quarter for the last 18 months. And so quadratic funding is really driving the completion of Gitcoin's mission, which is to grow open source, but on the individual level, it's to allow you to work for the open internet. No more bosses. Working for public infrastructure on the internet is what we're after here. We've created $7 million worth of gross marketplace value so far. So this is a place where if you're looking to make a couple $1,000s a month, that's totally plausible. If you check out gitcoin.co/results, you can see a bunch of stats about Gitcoin's network, about $7 million done so far. And then you can see things like we have a bounties product. How much hourly rate can you make using the bounties product, and a bunch of stats about the Gitcoin network. So would encourage you to check that out if you're an analytic minded person, which I am, and many software engineers are. Gitcoin.co/results talks all about the value created with that $7 million. And you can also just go to gitcoin.co/grants if you want to see CLR round 7 going on now. Creating a mesh network of human beings. And you can contribute to it. You can contribute to public goods if you go to gitcoin.co/grants and contribute to your favorite open source software projects. We're not just stopping with the Ethereum ecosystem, by the way. Quadratic funding is growing outside of the Ethereum ecosystem. So we just recently, down here in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I live, I'm your neighbor to the south, by the way, down here in Colorado, we just ran this thing called Downtown Stimulus, which was a quadratic funding round for Peace, Love, and Chocolate, Amani Yoga, and several other businesses in downtown Boulder, Colorado. So we jumped out of that crypto space and just accepted credit cards for quadratic funding. It was a huge success. We raised 50K, and that's for downtown businesses who are trying to make their rent in Boulder, Colorado. A livable downtown is a public good. So we can use quadratic funding outside of these crypto ecosystems. The math is sound and it works game theoretically. We just have to find new ways of making these experiments bloom. Which we are doing also inside of the crypto ecosystem. So if you're a consumer of Zcash, Matic, Polkadot, any of these other crypto ecosystems, then we'll be doing quadratic funding with you sometime soon. And excited to talk to more crypto ecosystems about giving them access to Gitcoin grants, which according to Vitalik.ca, Vitalik Buterin's blog, Vitalik is the co-founder of the Ethereum project. And in this blog post, he said that Gitcoin grants is a significant pillar of the Ethereum ecosystem that more and more projects are relying on for some or all of their support. So if you're, say, like, I don't know, in an ecosystem that we're not talking to, would love to talk about how we take our tech, which is already proven and working in the Ethereum space, to your ecosystem. And hopefully, while we're doing that, we're going from 500K a quarter given to public goods to $5 million per quarter. That's a lot of money, $5 million per quarter. And the idea here is that we can create more quadratic freelancers. There's this idea that you can just work for the open internet if we're giving enough money to public goods. And that's what really excites me about working on quadratic funding. I think we're creating an opportunity for more digital democracy to exist by creating a space where more democratically we can fund public goods. And as we move to the information age, I really don't want to be in a dictator-driven species. I don't want to be in a financial network that is oligarchical in power. I think that we've experimented with representative democracies, and I think that that's a really, really elegant model that seems to have at least made the baby boomers happy. And so my vision is, what would it look like if we were more democratic in supporting each other and trusting each other? What if we were a completely peer-to-peer networked organization species? What if you could create these economic relationships where the power isn't asymmetric, the power is equal among the participants in the network, and or proportional, at least, I guess, to their importance. So how can we create that? And I think that quadratic funding is doing that. And if you want to check out gitcoin.co/grants, you can play with quadratic funding today, fund some of the best projects in the Ethereum space. And we're going to be mapping the preferences of every single person who contributes to quadratic funding round 7. And I think that what's really cool is that we found a way to take all these diverse people across the world who maybe have different interests, different backgrounds, different family stories. We all are different. And we found a way to take these preferences and to map them into a way that supports the things that we care about. And that, to me, is one of the most exciting things about working on quadratic funding. It's not just math, and it is very engineering and mathy, but it's also community. It's how do communities support each other in an information age way. So that to me is just like the most amazing thing in the world, because we're working on this mission that I really, really deeply care about, which is trying to help people work for the open internet, creating more economic relationships for open source software developers so that they can work on open source software. And so if you want to find out WTF is QF, you can check out gitcoin.co/grants or WTFisQF.com. Thank you so much to Rich and the Wyohack organizers for having me. I really, really love to drive up to Wyoming every year and come hang out with you. And so I'm hopeful in 2021, I'm going to get to come hang out with people in person, and I'm going to have even more cool quadratic things to show off in 2021 in Wyoming. Thanks again for having me. Cheers.